Yo, what is good, and welcome back to the No Cap Podcast. This is your boy Mike Mitch, and we are back talking about this weather. So I want to say it was 2025, or actually this past winter. I currently live in Idaho, the state of Idaho, and usually in the winters we get a lot of snow, right? This past winter, Idaho, I think got like 0.1 inches or like 0.3 inches of snow. But then back in my hometown, which is VA, Virginia, we still get snow, but not like Idaho. But then they just go into a complete blizzard. The major lakes around my house completely froze. Lake Audubon, Lake Thoreau, and then there's another lake. I forgot the last one. But they completely froze. Like people were, some of my friends were sending me videos of like some of the locals, some of the people like standing and walking on the fucking river or the lake, sorry. So what that brings me to is this topic that I just got introduced to. It's called El Nino. So apparently in 2026 at some point in time, we're supposed to have a El Nino. And in El Nino, let me look that up for you guys because I don't really know. I can't really explain what an El Nino is. Okay, so El Nino refers to a naturally occurring climate pattern in which sea surface temperatures in the central and eastern tropical Pacific Ocean warm at least 0.5 degrees Celsius above normal, disrupting global weather patterns. Okay, so it's basically saying the sea is warming up, so it's causing a lot of weather shifts. It's probably what they're talking. That's probably why they've been talking about global fucking warming for so long. But anywho, let's get into the video. This dude's going to explain everything. This video is from Astrum Earth. Let's get into it.
It's shit like Simon says, what I say go, my goods be doing the most.
Something is shifting in the Pacific Ocean. It's not a storm or a current you can see from the surface, but a slow, powerful build-up of heat, spanning thousands of kilometers. And it's been playing a dangerous game of hide and seek. Now, out there for all to witness, the Pacific Ocean is undergoing a violent flip. The latest information suggests we are on the precipice of a super El Nino, possibly the strongest El Nino event in 140 years. That's very crazy. Rare high-intensity episode that will propel global temperatures into uncharted territory. This isn't a seasonal shift, it's a global reorganization of energy. According to the latest data, there is now a 98% chance of El Nino emerging by August, and by September 2026, the rise of a full-blown super El Nino is now almost inevitable. This kind of El Nino would see intensified heat waves, floods, droughts, and shifts in monsoon and hurricane patterns all around the world. Indeed, could a 2026 super El Nino push our climate past the point of no return? I'm James Stewart and you're watching Astrum Earth. Join me today as we look at the mechanics of this climate engine. We'll discuss why 2026 is becoming the perfect storm for a record-breaking event. And we'll look at what a planet already pushed to the brink by climate change does when its largest natural cooling mechanism is replaced by a furnace. I didn't expect to be making this video quite as quickly as I am, to be honest with you. Let me take you back a few months to a video I made about the weak La Nina we had in 2025 that went into 2026. In fact, it was so weak, we suggested in that video that a Pacific flip was possible, a kind of climate whiplash, where after months of La Nina's cold pattern, the Pacific would be primed to swing hot and bring on a sort of monster of an El Nino. Now, when I made that video, the chances of that actually happening were quite low, and we didn't know how hot things might get, if indeed they would at all. But as it turns out, that prediction was bang on, and it's coming true, unfortunately, right in front of our eyes. And things are escalating pretty quickly. So here's a quick recap if you missed that video. The El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, is a term used to describe a cycle of variations in the Pacific Ocean's surface temperatures and air pressure near the equator. Normally, trade winds drive warm surface water from near South America, the Eastern Pacific, towards Asia. As that warm water moves away from South America, cold water rises to replace it in a process called upwelling. This situation is called ENSO-neutral. Now, if those trade winds are weaker than usual, this upwelling effect lessens, resulting in a warmer patch in the Eastern Pacific Ocean. If those sea surface temperatures rise by more than half a degree Celsius above average, then that is an El Nino. Conversely, when trade winds are stronger, ocean temperatures dip below average and we see a La Nina develop, where those temperatures are more than half a degree Celsius lower than average. This cycle lasts between 9 and 12 months and repeats every 2 to 7 years. And at the time of recording, we're in an ENSO-neutral state, at least according to NOAA. But not for much longer. During an El Nino, Eastern Pacific sea surface temperatures usually do reach around 1 to 3 degrees Celsius above normal, shifting tropical convection currents and jet streams. This typically brings wetter winters to California and some regions in South America, and drier conditions to Australia, Indonesia, and southern Africa. In fact, one strange quirk of El Nino is that it tends to suppress Atlantic hurricanes. What it does is increase upper level winds across the tropical Atlantic. That then creates wind shear that pulls apart tropical storm systems before they can develop into the hurricanes. But unfortunately, it's bad news elsewhere because it enhances the potential for Pacific storms. That's due to an increase in energy in the ocean, because warm surface water fuels the development of tropical storms, which turn into cyclones. It also generally raises global temperatures by 0.1 to 0.2 degrees Celsius above trend, often producing the warmest years on record if they coincide with ongoing warming. Now, I should point out at this point that this is not a new concept, nor is having an El Nino a product of climate change. It's a natural part of our planet, a heartbeat that's been thumping for at least 10,000 years. I mean, we have evidence of Enso's chemical fingerprints in ancient coral fossils and sediment cores stretching back long before the first steam engine was even built. But this year feels different. Something sinister is brewing out there, and it's starting to look very much like we're heading for a super El Nino. Now, some housekeeping here on what actually constitutes a super El Nino, because I'll be honest with you, if you're asked a scientist, that term, well, doesn't actually exist, but it does make for a good media headline and title on this thumbnail. NOAA, who are the people right on the forefront of this stuff, monitor El Nino with a measure called the Oceanic Nino Index, or ONI. It's basically a 3-month running mean of sea surface temperature relative to a 30-year base. So El Nino is declared, as we said, when that ONI goes above 0.5 degrees Celsius for 5 or more overlapping seasons. And just to make things a bit more complicated, NOAA recently changed to a new kind of measuring index called the Relative ONI Index to account for increased background warming, which it didn't previously. So, within this new way of measuring how strong an El Nino actually is, they class a weak one as between 0.5 and 1 degrees Celsius, a moderate one would be between 1 and 1.5 degrees Celsius, and a strong El Nino is 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. So therefore, with a bit of creative license, a super El Nino would be somewhere 2 degrees Celsius above average or more. And despite not having a proper term for it, that has happened before. In fact, it's happened 4 times since NOAA started these measurements, in 1982, 1991, 1997, and most recently in 2015. In every single case, each relative ONI rating was more than 2 degrees Celsius. And in November 2015, the index was a whopping 2.4 degrees Celsius. That's more than strong. I mean, that rating was looking for a phone booth to take off its glasses and don a superhero cape with. In all seriousness though, these giant events have globe-spanning consequences. The 2015 El Nino coincided with severe drought in Ethiopia, water shortages in Puerto Rico, and an extraordinary Central Pacific hurricane season, all combining to produce record global warmth. More than 60 million people were affected, with extreme food insecurity primarily across Africa, Central America, and the Pacific. It triggered the most devastating global coral bleaching event in history, and the impacts weren't just felt environmentally. $3.9 trillion was wiped from the global economy in the following 3 years due to the lost agricultural productivity and infrastructure damages. So, is history about to repeat itself again? As of early 2026, the tropical Pacific returned to an ENSO-neutral state after that weak La Nina we spoke about. But don't be fooled, because that's just on the surface. It's what's brewing below that's starting to ring alarm bells. NOAA reports that ocean subsurface heat content has been climbing for months and is now well above normal. In March to April 2026, meteorologists observed bursts of westerly winds driving warm water eastward, a classic precursor to El Nino. Now, usually Pacific trade winds are easterly, holding warm water in the west, but those winds are faltering. As they weaken, a series of Kelvin waves, massive pulses of warm water, are travelling thousands of miles across the ocean. And when they hit the South American coast, they sort of uncork the heat, and suddenly you've got all this energy just sat there waiting to be unleashed. In fact, NASA have just caught one of these Kelvin waves in action with the Sentinel-6 Michael Freilich satellite. You can clearly see it cross the Pacific Ocean and hit the South American coast. But here's the catch, because on top of the natural cycle happening, this time we're layering a natural surge onto a planet that's already spent 12 consecutive months above the 1.5 degree warming threshold. 2024 was the hottest year on record, and it occurred during an ENSO-neutral year. There was no extra heating boost from El Nino. So before we even add in a naturally occurring event that increases temperatures, we're already working with a much higher baseline, and that's a problem. It's a bit like a loaded spring. That heat hasn't fully reached the surface yet, but when it does, it can rapidly trigger El Nino conditions. The scary thing is that exact same pattern showed up before the 1997 and 2015 Super El Ninos too. So the big question is then, how big is this one going to be? Well, for starters, NOAA's Climate Prediction Center has placed the odds of El Nino emerging by July at 82%, with a 37% chance of a very strong El Nino by winter 2026. The UK and European estimates are, how do I put this, a little more aggressive. Met Office data here in the UK shows 2 degrees Celsius anomalies by September 2026. And the ECMWF, the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, shows there is a chance of temperature anomalies exceeding 3 degrees before October, taking us well into super territory. Indeed, on the other side of the scale to NOAA, according to the ECMWF, the odds of a super El Nino by July have already climbed beyond 50%. And as we approach winter, its emergence appears inevitable. Just a quick word of caution here when it comes to data and modelling. I know you know this, but I just have to sort of say it. Forecasters do note that models tend to overshoot El Nino strength in the spring, and the outcome actually depends on whether those westerly winds continue what they're doing. But because they're doing it right now, that's where these numbers come from. However you choose to interpret those numbers is up to you, but what I think we can deduce for certain is that the environment is primed for a strong event. So, if we do end up with the fabled Super El Nino, well, what does that mean for us? The short answer is amplified extremes. All the usual El Nino effects would be supercharged. It'd be like driving around in your car playing your music with your bass turned up to maximum, you know? The first and perhaps most obvious thing we've already touched on, there would be a record-breaking global heat spike. Each El Nino year brings hotter conditions globally, and even without the help of all the extra greenhouse gas emissions, we'd usually expect somewhere in the region of 0.1 to 0.2 degrees worth of increase. But for a super El Nino, well, that could push temperatures in 2026, 2027 to unprecedented heights, the hottest years on record, exceeding 1.7, even 1.8 degrees above pre-industrial levels. In the most extreme scenarios, sea surface temperature anomalies in the Pacific region approach a stark 3.8 degrees Celsius by the year end. And when you consider that the IPCC wanted to limit warming to just 1.5 degrees, you start to see just how extreme this really is. And it's not just the temperatures we should be worrying about either. There will be a series of extreme precipitation patterns in every corner of the planet. A super El Nino would bring torrential rains to the coasts of Peru and Ecuador, but inland, the Amazon rainforest would face a thermal stress test. By combining intense drought with record-breaking temperatures, trees would be pushed beyond their tolerance limits. Previous super El Ninos have seen the Amazon switch from a carbon sink to a carbon source, as drought kills off massive swathes of the canopy. In 2026, with the baseline temperature already higher, the risk of megafires in the world's lungs would be at an all-time high. In North America, the jet stream is expected to split, so the US Southwest and California would get a sort of Godzilla winter with heavy snowpack and torrential rains. Now, this may help relieve reservoirs in the short term, but it brings the immediate threat of atmospheric rivers, long plumes of water vapour coming in from the tropics. These events can trigger catastrophic landslides and cause localised flooding. Meanwhile, the Pacific Northwest would experience unusually hot and dry conditions. On the other side of the world, in Australia, the news is also sobering. The Bureau of Meteorology has already issued a below average rainfall forecast for the eastern and southwestern parts of the country, and it's not just the lack of rain. Farmers in New South Wales are facing a perfect storm. They're still recovering from the massive floods of previous years, but now they could be hit by a triad of pressures: intensifying drought, extreme bushfire risk, and a global spike in fertiliser and fuel costs, all thrown into one. As we touched on earlier as well, El Nino does something strange to traditional hurricane patterns. Generally, it tends to tilt the odds of Pacific cyclones and reduce the number of Atlantic hurricanes. In 2015, for example, during the strongest El Nino we've ever seen so far, the Central Pacific had an unusually active cyclone season. In total, there were 16, including 3 simultaneous Category 4 storms. It was crazy. So a 2026 Super El Nino would likely mean, a quieter Atlantic season, which is good news for the US East Coast, but terrible news for Eastern Pacific cyclones that affect Mexico, Hawaii, and beyond. And you guessed it, there's more. Historically, El Ninos have caused fish declines and even penguin die-offs in the Galapagos due to changes in ocean currents. A Super El Nino would only magnify these biological stresses. And all of that before we've even gotten to the thing that keeps us alive: food. I mean, even now, climate analysts are already warning that a strong El Nino could significantly strain food supplies. The India Meteorological Department has pegged the 2026 monsoon at just 92% of its long period average, the lowest in nearly 30 years. And that has a direct threat to the Kharif crops, the staples, things like rice, cotton and soybeans that literally feed billions of people. If the rains fail in August and September, we aren't just looking at dry fields. We're looking at food inflation that could exceed 4.5%, destabilising the rural economy for the entire subcontinent. And there's another twist in this too. The Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit just released an article noting that an El Nino-driven weather shock on top of war-related fertiliser and fuel disruptions could drive up both prices and inflation. In short, harvests in those key farming regions, so rice in Asia, coffee in Africa, maize in Latin America, would majorly suffer, amplifying hunger and economic stress not just locally, but across the entire planet. Analysis by the United Nations World Food Programme warned that the number of food insecure people across the globe could reach levels last seen at the start of the Russian-Ukraine invasion in 2022, impacting up to 318 million people across the globe who are already food insecure. Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? Sorry for that tirade of information. If you aren't looking for a scrap of good news, well, as good as can be, come to Europe. Over here where I am in the UK and into mainland Europe, El Nino's influence is more indirect. Some studies suggest El Nino's winters tend to be milder and wetter in northern Europe, but the signal is pretty weak, and the summer impacts are even less predictable. If you look back at some of the developing El Nino years in 1997 and 2015 and even 2023, they all featured at least some hot spells, but no simple pattern or something that unified them in any way. But of course, thanks to our good old friend global warming, any El Nino effect might actually be quite hard to disentangle from the ongoing trend of record summer heat in Europe anyway, so either way. And all of that stuff we've just talked about doesn't just have a human cost. There is also quite a large financial one. In 2023, researchers from Dartmouth University estimated the average El Nino saps about $3.4 trillion from the global economy. That's because of destroying crops, preventing the flow of goods and services, all that kind of stuff. Now that's just the estimate for an average El Nino, so a super El Nino would be far more devastating. None of that makes for great reading at all, does it really? There's nothing remotely super about any of this for us at all, which does sort of beg the question, why is this happening in the first place? Well, you might assume it's because of global warming, which is sort of what I think as well. But bear with me here because this sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but scientists are actually continuing to study how global warming affects the El Nino Southern Oscillation cycle. And the truth, they say, isn't clear-cut. Look, as I've alluded to in this video, El Nino isn't new, nor is it particularly special. It used to be like that uncle you saw at family events every couple of years who sort of said something weird, and then you never saw him again until the next event. But this time, something is clearly different. The UN's warned that Earth's climate is further out of balance right now than at any other time in recorded history. So how can both things be true? I mean, based on that, good old Uncle Enzo would have rocked up to the party at some point anyway, right? Well, yeah, but today's ocean is warmer than decades past. The WMO notes that 2015 to 2025 ocean temperatures were the hottest 11-year span on record, with Earth gaining heat faster than ever. More than 90% of the Earth's extra energy also heats the oceans, and according to the WMO, the heat stored in the upper 2 kilometers of global oceans reached a new high in 2025. Over the last 2 decades, it's been warming more than twice as quickly as it was during the late 20th century. Add into that a series of late winter westerly wind bursts that have injected heat eastward, pumping up the tropical Pacific's heat content even more, and the stage is set for a potentially very strong or even super event. If, or indeed when, that happens, it will escalate into a super El Nino, the likes of which we've only seen a few times in history, and that will supercharge global warming and extremes around the planet. NOAA's Climate Prediction Centre updates their ENSO predictions once a month, so maybe by the time you're watching this we'll have more information. We may even be in the midst of a super El Nino. But what we do know is that super El Ninos have happened before, and they will likely happen again. And whatever happens, it's going to be a wild old ride watching this one play out.
All right, guys, I was mistaken. This isn't just a regular El Nino. This is a super El Nino. And this could affect a lot of different things. And based on the video, you know, they don't really know if it's based off global warming or if it's based off something else. But if this is the case, again, it goes back to, I think, my last video I posted. Why now? Why is all of this stuff happening right now? You know, in the like this year, you know, it's just like back to back to back to back to back stuff is just happening. So, like I tell people, stock up, keep the stuff that you actually have to a minimum. Like, don't be a hoarder. Like, get rid of your stuff. If you can sell it, make some money off it, cool. Keep the money. Because, again, like, people are struggling with money. People are struggling with a place to live. You have these world events going on. Apparently, you have a super El Nino coming as soon as next month. And this month is halfway over. We have, like, literally a week and a half left of this month. So, you know, I try not to, again, it's not a fear-mongering thing. It's not a, oh, my God, panic thing. It's, okay, guys, be aware. Start being aware of this and this, that, and this. Because I remember back in the day, a lot of people probably remember this too. I lived in the DMV. So, like, the DC sniper, for example. You're not going to go out expecting your head to get blown off by them, but at the same time, you're going to be cautious. You know what I mean? Like, I know my grandmother still went out, did whatever she would, but she had to be cautious. She was still being cautious, like keeping out, like, you know, keeping an eye out for like other cars, you know, this, all types of stuff. But, yeah, it's not to fearmonger, it's to be cautious and to understand that, hey, I guess we're in a time where shit is happening because shit always happens. So I wanted to shed light on something that I found out, and I found this out. I want to say I found out about El Nino within like the last like 2 days, 2, 3 days. So like I wanted to shed light on it. I want to bring it to people's attention if they didn't already know it. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. I want to try to get this page to 500 subscribers by the end of the month, and if I can shoot past that to 1,000, that's the back end goal. You feel me? We're gonna shoot for the we're gonna shoot for the stars so we can land on the clouds. That's what we're gonna do. You feel me? So the cloud is the 500. You know, that's a goal. You know, because we high up there, and then right now, the shooting for the stars is 1,000. So, like I said, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, hit that comment button. Keep them coming. I'm going to keep putting topics out, like I said, on car stuff and more stuff on stuff going on around the world, because that's what I like. I like cars and stuff. I like all types of stuff, but I also like being aware of my surroundings, and I like to know what's going on around me, like at all times. So that's what we're gonna continue pushing. We're gonna have to really ramp up the content because like I said, I want to get my stats up. So peace.